All right, guys, Tyler down here at Emerald City Guitars. We're very blessed at this shop to see once-in-a-lifetime guitars on a relatively regular basis. Things like Bursts, Blackguard Tellys, pre-war D-45s. But this is a guitar that's got us all really, really excited. It is, I think, the most important instrument we've ever had in the shop. So this guitar is a 1950 D-28, which by itself is not a particularly remarkable guitar. It's fine. But what makes this guitar really, really special is some modifications that were done to it in the early 1950s by a guy named Paul Bigsby. Now, if you don't know Paul Bigsby, he was the father of the solid body electric guitar, and for my money, probably the most important figure in electric guitar history. In the mid to late 1940s, when the solid body electric guitar was kind of in its infancy, he was kind of an old guy, at least in the industry. I mean, he was 10 years older than Leo Fender, I think over 15 older than Les Paul. And the reason I think that's important is because he had several careers before he even got into instrument making. So his first career, he was actually a motorcycle racer, which if you know how dangerous motorcycles are nowadays, you can imagine how dangerous it was back then when they all weighed like 800 pounds and were made by hand. So the guy was a maniac. But he kind of parlayed that success as a motorcycle racer into working for a company called Crocker Motorcycles, which interestingly enough was kind of like the Bigsby of motorcycles. They were a very small shop but made ultra high-end racing motorcycles. And during that time, he was the shop foreman, he was a machinist, he was an engineer. He ended up designing a lot of the parts that are on those motorcycles that you can still see today. The reason I mention that is because I think his work in motorcycle design was really informative of his musical instrument design in later years. He liked playing the steel guitar, he loved listening to steel guitar music, but interestingly enough, his introduction into Spanish guitar building came through motorcycles. So it all started for Paul in 1947. He was basically being an announcer for a motorcycle race in Los Angeles when he was approached by a man named Merle Travis, a very famous country musician at the time. Now, Merle had heard about Paul from his friend Joaquin Murphy, a very famous steel guitar player, who knew that Paul was also into motorcycles, Merle was into motorcycles, they had a lot in common. So he told Merle basically, next motorcycle race you see Paul, go introduce yourself, and he did. So right off the bat, Paul, whose friends called him PA, and Merle Travis were fast friends. They had a ton in common, motorcycles, steel guitar, country music, everything. And it wasn't long before Merle Travis was over at his house all the time. Anytime anything went wrong with his motorcycle, he'd bring it over to PA's house and he'd help him fix it. And they were truly very close friends. So in the years leading up to PA and Merle meeting, Merle had this idea that he wanted a guitar, but he wanted a guitar with more sustain, something that sustained like a steel guitar, not like a hollow guitar that had been electrified. So he brought this idea to Paul Bigsby with the concept that a solid body, like a steel guitar with a Spanish neck, would yield the results that he was looking for. Now he asked PA if he would design him a guitar. He said, sure, I absolutely will. And the result of that was, in my eyes, the first modern solid body Spanish electric guitar. So it's a very famous guitar. It's at the Country Music Hall of Fame. And it was very important for kind of setting into motion a lot of design principles that were used for years to come and still today in solid body electric guitars. Now, when PA gave Merle this guitar, he was over the moon about it. He used it live on tons of records. It was his favorite guitar. So Merle's issue at that time with modern guitars is that the necks were a little bit chunky for him, given that his style was kind of like wrapping his thumb over to fret bass lines. If you've heard his music, you know what I'm talking about. So Paul made him a custom neck that was a little bit slimmer and that was really conducive to the way he played. He was so happy with his new electric guitar that he figured that Paul should make him a new neck for his 1941 D-28 so he could play the same way on that guitar. So Merle brought this idea to Paul, and Paul was all about it. He made him a beautiful bird's eye maple neck for his D-28, and Merle, again, was over the moon about it. He loved it so much, and he was extremely vocal about how much he loved it. He told everybody how great these necks were. He was very famously quoted a few times saying, Paul Bigsby makes necks that fret the truth. I don't know that intonation was a huge issue at that time for, pre-war Martins. In my experience, they've been pretty good. But in any case, he loved it, and through that, he kind of made these Bigsby necked acoustics a sort of status symbol in country music. It was very flashy, it was custom, and that's kind of what was in vogue, in country music in those days. So it wasn't long before pretty much every big country star of the day had a Bigsby re-necked acoustic guitar. Guys like Joe Mathis, Rex Allen, Hank Thompson, Lefty Frizzell, they all had their Bigsby necks. All in all, throughout the years, he made somewhere between 10 and 15 of these necks for acoustic guitars, one of which for the wonderful Martha Carson that we have right here. So Martha Carson might not be a household name anymore, but back in the 1950s, she certainly was. She was very famous. And she got her start singing with her sisters on the WSB Barn Dance, which is kind of a radio program out of Atlanta. And her big break finally came in 1951 with a song she wrote called Satisfied, which at the time was a big, big hit. Actually, Chet Atkins played guitar on the session for her. It's been covered by tons of people, and it made her into a star. So the success that Martha had with the song Satisfied led to a couple big record contracts for her and a couple, pretty high-profile tours, the most notable of which actually with Elvis Presley. Now during this tour, Martha and Elvis actually became very, very close. They were wonderful friends. Apparently they would spend hours after shows just singing gospel duets together. They both kind of had their roots in gospel music. Apparently Elvis played this guitar, at least that's what we hear from the Carson family. And Elvis was actually quoted once saying that Martha Carson had more influence on his stage style than anyone else did. So as the 1950s progressed on, Martha had a couple more minor hits, but nothing that really reached the level that Satisfied did in 1951. And she continued to tour, but by the late 50s, unfortunately, her popularity was waning a little bit. She did continue to play out quite a bit, but didn't record another album until I think 1977, which happened to be a greatest hits album. So this greatest hits album, when it was released, it actually kind of created a minor resurgence in her career. And for the next couple decades, she toured very regularly, mostly around the South, where she had a lot of fans still, up until pretty close to her death in 2004 at the age of 83. So this particular guitar, as I said, body's a 1950 D-28. The neck is by Paul Bigsby. These necks weren't serialized when he put them on, so it's difficult to tell when it was built, although we can date this one through pictures and a couple features to around 1952 or 1953. You see in the Bigsby logo, it has a little kind of connected dot over the eye, and that's indicative of this 52 to 53 period. And that's also concurrent with some historical pictures that we have of her with the guitar with this neck. So this bridge, however, it was not made by Paul Bigsby. It was actually made by a guy named James Fagan, who was a luthier, tinkerer, inventor, kind of a Bigsby-esque figure to a lesser extent in Texarkana. He did a lot of repairs, a lot of modifications. I guess he built a guitar for Tex Ritter that's in the Texas Country Music Hall of Fame. So James Fagan was kind of a minor celebrity in the world of guitar modification at that time. Our best guess for this bridge as far as dating goes would be somewhere in the late 50s or early 60s. And the reason we know that is because Martha in 1961 or 1962 put out a record called This Old House. On the cover she's holding this guitar with this bridge, so we know it's got to be earlier than that. And we've also seen a couple pictures of her with this guitar, with this bridge, where she looks quite a bit younger. So we're thinking our best guess was probably sometime in the late 50s that this bridge was put on. But again, we only have the pictures to go off of and guess. So since then it has had a little work. It's had some repair, some overspray, but nothing unusual for a guitar that was used very regularly for 50 plus years of touring. So there are videos on YouTube of her playing this guitar from the 1950s up to very shortly before her death. There's one of her in like 2002 playing this guitar on some, it's not public access, but it's like a country TV show. And she absolutely kills it. She is just a consummate professional, absolute showman. And it's amazing to see this guitar through the years as it progressed. This was her #1 guitar throughout her entire career. It's very clear that she loved it dearly. And we're just so honored and so humbled that her family is allowing us to be a part of this guitar's incredible story. As long as I've been involved with guitars, Bigsby stuff has been the top of the mountain holy grail for me. So to have this on my bench, it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience for me. So to wrap up this video, I can't help but paraphrase Martha and say, we've reached our journey's end and I'm satisfied. Lord, I'm satisfied. So this guitar actually has already sold, but before we pack it up and ship it off to its new owner, we're gonna hand it over to Skylar Mehall so we can kind of give you an idea of how this thing sounds.